In the last video we looked at the technology delta, and with a large technology delta a new technology may gain a lot of attention and create even a bit of a hype. And I guess you think that a number of the new technologies presently are hyped. And you may not even agree upon the timing that some say which should be the correct one for implementation. And this is exactly what the hype cycle tries to illustrate and address. The hype cycle was first introduced by Gartner in 1995 and was developed by the analyst Jackie Fenn. We here use the hype cycle as an illustration and model for expectations and timing for a new technology. Here's the hype cycle. On the x-axis we have maturity or time, and on the y-axis we have the visibility or expectations. The general pattern is that we get a very strong increase early on regarding visibility and expectations that then falls dramatically. So we go from a very optimistic view to a rather pessimistic, and by the end here a more realistic view on what the technology may deliver and when. The curve can be seen as a combination of two curves. The first one represents the hype bubble, and the second is more of a normal maturity or growth curve. The first represents speculations regarding the potential, and the second represents a more fact-based view regarding the potential. Here we see a recent version of the Gartner hype cycle. According to the model, a technology will move along this line, and it will come all the way to the end if the expectations eventually materializes. The hype cycle may be divided into a number of sections. The first one, technology trigger, is when we get a major breakthrough in a new technology and we are building up a lot of expectations, but the technology is still unproven. The second is the peak of inflated expectations. We go from early success stories to failures and disappointment. Then we move on to the trough of disillusionment, where experiments and implementations still fail to deliver. The fourth one, the slope of enlightenment. Then the technology becomes more understood and the true value is shown, and we have a number of implementations. And the last phase is the plateau of productivity. There we get the mainstream adoption of technology and implementation really takes off. But how does then the hype cycle relate to the technology adoption curve that we talked about before? You could say it's two perspectives of the same thing. For instance, the chasm in the technology adoption curve is where we move from disappointment to realism in the hype cycle. Let's take some examples. Let's look at the last version of the Gartner hype cycle. What do we find there? For instance, in the technology trigger phase, we find the brain-computer interface. No wonder there's a lot of expectations in that area. Really fascinating, but still not proven. Then we move up to the peak of inflated expectations. There we have, for instance, the Internet of Things. There has been so much talk about the Internet of Things, but to be honest, we haven't really seen a lot of implementation. So it's a bit of a disappointment. The trough of disillusionment, there we have augmented reality. Has been a lot of talk about that, but we have seen quite few implementations and it still fails to deliver according to the initial expectations. Slope of enlightenment, there we have enterprise 3D printing, and it's really creating significant real value today for the enterprises. And if we move on to the plateau of productivity, there of course we have established technologies. Is the hype cycle then a very good tool to use? Does it really predict the future? Well, there are a number of examples where this has shown to be quite correct. But also there are a number of examples where technologies that never made it throughout the full curve here. They drop out before, they become obsolete. We know also to be aware of that a number of technologies never make it into the curve. They are actually not getting so much attention that we can even talk about a hype. But they still may have a huge potential. How do we use the curve? Well, it's a question about timing. We need to plan what we do. So whether we invest or we do R&D or we plan some marketing activities. And this will give us an indication of where the technology is so we don't waste resources. In our course here, we will use this as an input for when we try to look at the impact of technology and draw the map of the future. These hypes or the technologies are always debated. And we can make use of that debate because in the debate there is always pros and cons for whether this will materialize. And we will later on show how we use that when we try to get a higher quality of the map that we will draw. Other than alternatives to the hype cycle, well, one common alternative that's widely used is technology readiness level. Here we see one example of that. The technology readiness level illustrates a technology's maturity and risk. The method was first used by NASA and is now widely used, mainly within high-tech areas where there are significant demands to validate and verify new technologies. The technology readiness level may also be helpful in our process when we try to estimate the impact of a specific technology. In the next video, we will start looking at how the system, rather than the technology, is changing over time. We will take a closer look at the megatrends.